Hello and welcome to this lesson where we create a custom box trigger blueprint that handles restarting the level when the player enters it. Okay, so we have the situation where the player can roll off the level and fall endlessly into the abyss below. Okay, so we need to come up with a solution to this. We want something to happen when the player falls off. So let's think about this. How can we detect if a player has entered or gone through a certain area of your level? You might be thinking box trigger, and you would be right. We can use a box trigger. We can find this on the basic tab here. We can drag this out. But we want to think about this situation on a higher level now. If we end up creating multiple levels for our game, we want to minimize the amount of repetitive code we have to write. If we end up using Unreal's default box trigger, we will have to do a lot of repetitive coding in the level blueprint, meaning for each level we would have to add a box trigger actor, select the actor, reference it in the level blueprint, and then add the code. It's just not going to be very reusable for us. So what can we do instead? Well, we can create our own blueprint actor that we can place in our levels and reuse. Remember that blueprints give us great reusability, as we can place them in our levels as many times as we want, and if we affect the code for a single blueprint, it will affect it for every instance that's placed across all of our levels. We're going to create a new blueprint actor, and when the player passes through this actor, it's going to cause the level to fade out and restart. So your challenge right now is to create a new blueprint actor and name the actor appropriately. Think about its function. It's a trigger, it's restarting the level when the player enters it, and we're using it as a boundary. So I'll leave the name up to you, and for the final step, I want you to add a box collision component to it. So I encourage you to pause the video here to give this challenge a go before I take you through the process in just a few moments. So we want to create a new blueprint actor. To do this, we can just right click in the blueprints folder within the content browser, and we can create a new basic asset. We can create a blueprint class. When we select this, we can choose the class. We know it's an actor we want to create, so we will select actor, and now we can just give it a name. My actor is going to be named BP underscore level restart trigger. Okay, and we can hit enter, and we can double click on this blueprint to open it. Now I asked you to add a component to it. I asked you to add the box collision component. So we can come up to add component, and we can type and search for it because there's so many components, but we can also scroll down and try find it. It's under the collision section here. We have different types of collisions here that are basically just different shapes that we can use for triggers, and we can grab the box collision component here, and if we want to name it, we can just name it trigger. Now here comes the question of the root components here. We have the default scene root and we have the trigger. We know we can click and drag the trigger onto the default scene root to get rid of it and use the trigger as the root component. But I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to show you why. It's a very simple reason. If we come back to the level and drag out the trigger, we can see we have this little white circle here showing the default scene root, and as I scale this, okay, it's going to become larger and it's going to become harder to actually select the sides of it. So I'm really simply just using this as a little handle that I can easily select in the editor there. It doesn't have any other purpose. So let's come back to the trigger and let's start doing some visual coding. We want something to happen when the player enters this trigger, or better yet, we want something to happen when an actor overlaps this box collision component. If we select the trigger component and scroll down on the details panel, we can find a section for events. If we click any of these, it's going to create the event for us directly in the event graph. So let's look at these events and think about this. We want an event for when something overlaps with the trigger. Is there anything here that relates to that? Well, yes, there is. We can use onComponent begin overlap. So let's create this event here by hitting this green plus button. Now it doesn't look like it's done anything, but if we come over to the event graph, we can see that it's created the event for us. We can see that this event has quite a few different return values on it. Now we want to check to see if the player pawn has entered this trigger. The other actor pin just here, this returns the actor that's overlapped the trigger. So we can use this pin to check and see if it's the player pawn. Let's drag it out and release it. Now how can we compare this to see if it's the player pawn? Well, we can check and see if it's equal to it. In this search bar, if we just put in the equal symbol, we have a choice of a equal or not equal function here. Okay, we can just grab the equal function. Now on this node, we have two object reference inputs, okay? It's already connected our other actor into the top pin, and we have the ability to plug in another actor to compare it. And we want to compare it to the player pawn. So how do we get the player pawn in Blueprints? Well, it's really easy. We can just right click in the graph and we can type in the search bar, get player pawn. And we can just grab this function, which simply returns the player pawn with this return value just here. Now we don't need to worry about this player index because we're not creating a local multiplayer game, so we can completely ignore this. This has no meaning to us right now. We can grab the return value and plug it in to the second input here. And now our equal check returns this red pin, which is a boolean. It's going to tell us, or it's going to give us a true or false value. So how can we check if it's true or false? Well, we can use a branch. We could right click and search for it, or we can just hold down B on the keyboard and we can left click and it creates a branch for us. So the branch has a condition. We can hook up the Boolean pin straight into this. Let's make sure that we connect our execution pins up together. And now the branch returns true or false for us, depending on if the player pawn has entered this trigger. So how can we check to see if this works? How can we check it without using a print string? Well, we can create a breakpoint. A breakpoint will throw us directly to this line of code in our blueprint as soon as it's executed. To set a breakpoint, we can right click our branch and we can come down to where it says breakpoints here and we can toggle the breakpoint. It says the F9 is the hotkey for us here. So we can toggle this. It comes up with this yellow symbol for us. And this just means that we need to compile our blueprint. So if we hit compile, we can see it's now gone red and it's telling us now that a breakpoint is set on this branch. So what does this mean to us? Well, if we come back to our level, let's drag out this restart level trigger blueprint and let's put it underneath our level and we can simply scale it to make it larger and fit our area of the level. Now if we come into the level and hit play and just roll off the edge, let's see what happens when we fall down now. Okay, look, it's kicked us straight into our blueprint, letting us know that this has been executed. So we know that this works. We can hit stop to jump out of the game. We can take off the breakpoint by hitting F9, and now we can go about restarting the level. Now I want you to do this next part. I want you to call the function named getCurrentLevelName. This is going to return the name of the level that you are currently in. And then I want you to call the function named OpenLevel. We've already used this function in the previous section. And then attempt to connect both of these functions together in your execution flow and take a look at what happens. So pause here and give this a go, and then in a few moments we can take a look at this together. Okay, so I'm going to assume you've had a go at this now. Let's take a look at what happens. We know we want to restart the level if the player pawn has entered the trigger box. So we're going to work from the true output of the branch. I asked you to call a function named getCurrentLevelName. So let's do this now. Let's drag out the true of the branch and type in getCurrentLevelName. Okay, we can grab this function and we can see that this function returns a pink output pin here, and when we hover over this we can see that it's a string, and a string is a sequence of characters, and in the case of our function here it's just returning the name of our level as a string. Now we can drag out this output pin from the function and we can take a look at the next function I asked you to call, which was a function named OpenLevel. We used this in the previous section. As soon as this gets called, it's going to open the level, with the name that's provided in here. But look, the type of data we're dealing with is a different pin color to the string here. So what is this? When we hover over this, we can see that it is a name. So what do we need to know about this? Well, the main difference that you need to be aware of here is the fact that a name is case insensitive, meaning names treat uppercase and lowercase characters as the same value. Okay, so it's not a huge biggie, but it's something to be aware of. Now we can connect these two pins together just by dragging from one of them and connecting it into the other, and we can see that it's going to convert the string to a name. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. Let's come back to our level. We know we have our level restart trigger volume underneath our BSP geometry. We can select it, and I'm just going to make sure that this covers my whole map just by scaling it and moving it and scaling it around here. Let's take a look at what happens when we hit play. So when we hit play and we roll off the map, the level gets restarted instantly. Okay, so it works, but it's not perfect yet. We're going to spend some time polishing this up in the next lesson. And as always, I encourage you to use the lesson resources to find a link to the discussions where you can ask questions about this lesson and share your progress in the Game Dev TV community. So when you're ready, I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome to this lesson, which is all about fading cameras in and out by using the Player Camera Manager. Okay, so we want to take a look at polishing up the process of restarting the level when the player falls off below. To help make this happen, we're going to be making use of the Player Camera Manager. The Player Camera Manager is spawned in on play, so it exists only when the game starts. We can find it in the world outliner while we are playing the game, and it is listed in yellow because it's been dynamically spawned in at runtime. It is non-physical, just like the player controller. Okay, but what actually is it? This isn't really clear. Well, you can think of the Player Camera Manager as a class that contains functions and properties that relate to the current camera for the player. Okay, but how do we use it if it's only spawned in when the game starts? Well, it's accessible via Blueprints. We can gain access to the Player Camera Manager anywhere in Blueprints by calling the get Player Camera Manager function. So what does it do for us? How does this relate to our situation? Well, we can use the Player Camera Manager to call functions dealing with camera fading. When the player falls off the level, we want the camera to smoothly fade out, and then once it's faded out, the level will restart. I've given you a couple of pieces of the puzzle already, so I want you to have a go at this challenge. Inside your level restart trigger actor, get the Player Camera Manager, and then call the start camera fade function. Now you're going to have to figure out where this is going to be placed and executed in your code. So have a good think about this and try inserting it into your execution flow. Then in a few moments we'll go through this together. Okay, so I hope you had a good go at the challenge. So we want to start by getting the Player Camera Manager. To do this, we can right click and simply type and search in the search bar here for the Get Player Camera Manager function. And we can just grab this here, and this blue output pin here returns the Player Camera Manager. So if we were to drag this out, we can now call actions that relate to it. And we wanted to call the start camera fade function. If you had a little look around, you would see there's a camera fades category here. If we double click here, we can see a few camera fade functions, and we're going to grab the start camera fade. So now we have to decide where we want to insert this into our code here. Well, let's think about this. Do we want to insert it before we do a check to see if it's the player pawn that enters the trigger? Well, no, not really, because technically any actor could enter this trigger and cause the camera to fade out if it's placed here. So we only want to fade it out once we know the player pawn has entered the trigger. So we're definitely going to be looking after the true output of the branch. But now the question is, do we want to insert it before we get the current level name and then reopen the level? Well, yes, we do, because as soon as the open level function is executed, it's immediately going to reopen the level. So we want to insert it before here so we have a chance to fade the camera out. So how do we go about inserting it? Well, we need to break the execution pins here. We can do this just by right-clicking on the true output of the branch, and we can hit break link to get current level name, or we can use the hotkeys. We can hold down left alt and left click on the true output pin, and we can move these functions along. And we can bring up our camera fade function, connect the true output of the branch into this, and then we can connect the output pin of the start camera fade to the get current level name. So how do we use this camera fade function? We have these pins here named from alpha and to alpha, and we can find out what these do just by hovering over them. If we hover over from alpha, it says alpha at which to begin the fade. Its range is between 0 and 1, and where 0 is fully transparent and 1 is fully opaque solid color. Okay, so this is telling us that the value of 0 is going to be fully transparent, allowing us to see the game world, and the value of 1 is going to be fully opaque, meaning the world will be fully faded out. So how do we want the fade to start? Well, we want it to start fully transparent, then we want it to fade to a fully opaque solid color over time. So the start alpha, or the from alpha, is going to be 0, as we want to start by seeing the game world, and then the to alpha is going to be 1, because we want it to fade out. And now we have the option of choosing the duration. This is in seconds, how long it should take to fade out. I'm just going to use the value of 2 here for 2 seconds. We can change the color here if we want to. It's currently fading out to black. I'm going to leave mine fading out to black. And we can choose if we want to fade the audio. We don't currently have any audio in the game, so we can leave this unchecked. And then finally, we have this hold when finished. If this is unchecked, it means that after the fade is finished, it will then disappear. So let's turn this on, actually, to hold the fade. Now, this is looking good. Let's come back into our level and hit play. Let's see what happens when we roll off now. So it doesn't look like anything has happened. It hasn't faded out, it's just immediately restarted the level. So why would this be? Let's come back to the blueprint and take a look. This is because the start camera fade is executing, and then it is immediately executing the functions after it. So this is why it restarts straight away. So your challenge right now is to delay the execution flow before the level reopens, and you want to delay it by the same duration that it takes to fade the camera out. So pause the video here and give this challenge a go, and then when you're ready, come back and resume the lesson. Okay, so we want to add a delay function after our start camera fade and before the get current level name function. So to do this, we can drag out the output pin of the start camera fade, and we can simply type and search for delay, and we'll grab the delay here. Now I said that we wanted the delay duration to be the same duration of the camera fade. Now there's a problem here, because if we give the duration of 2 seconds for the delay and the duration of 2 seconds of the start camera fade, we've got the same number in 2 places. Remember I mentioned about magic numbers in a previous lesson. It's not so much a magic number because we can clearly see what this number does. It's controlling the duration on these functions. But what we really want to do is just have one value controlling the duration on both of these functions. But what if we don't want to clog up our variables tab with unnecessary properties? But we have the option of creating a literal float. If we right click and just type in to the search bar, make literal float, we can grab this function and we can just provide a single value here. Let's give it 2 for 2 seconds. And this return value can be reused in multiple locations. So we can drag it to the duration on both of these, and we don't need to create a variable out of this. Now, if you really want to create a variable, you totally can. I just wanted to show you an alternative here. Now let's come back to our level and hit play. And when we roll off, it does start to fade out now we're using this delay, but it's hard to see because once the fade is finished, it immediately restarts the level and we can see the world again. So what we really want to do to finish this off is to make it so the game fades in at the start of the level as well. So this is the final challenge for this lesson. Your objective is to have the camera fade in on begin play. Before you attempt this, think about where it would be best to execute this. That's the only hint I'm going to give. Remember, you can always use the lecture's discussions in the resources to ask any questions in the community, and you can always post and share your thoughts as to where you think you should execute this camera fade. So pause here for this final challenge, and then once you're ready, come back and hit resume, and I'll walk you through the process. Okay, so let's figure out the best place to fade the camera in when the game starts. There's different places we could do this. We don't really want to do it in the level blueprint because if we had a different level, we would have to paste our code around. So where else could we do this? We could potentially do it on the trigger actor, and that would work, but instead I'm going to have my camera fade in from begin play on the player pawn. And I'm going to do this because it's a very obvious place and it's relating to the player. There's other places you could do it too, such as the game mode, but I'm going to keep it on the player pawn. So we can right click and we can get the player camera manager and we can drag out the return value and we can start a camera fade. Now we want to start the camera fade from black. Remember that 0 is fully transparent and 1 is a fully solid opaque color. So the from alpha is going to be 1, the to alpha is going to be 0, and we could choose a duration here. It could be different. I'm going to use 3 seconds, and I'm going to leave the fade in as black, and we don't need to hold when finished, because once the fade is finished, it's going to be fully transparent anyway, so there's no reason to hold the fade. Let's just hook this up to the begin play. And remember, we can always change the length of time it takes to fade out the camera from the level trigger actor blueprint. I'm going to reduce my duration here to about 1 second. And remember to hit compile and save on your actors, and you can always just hit Control, Shift and S to save all. And now let's take a look at what happens when we hit play and roll off the edge. So we've just seen a little camera fade in there as well. Let's try this now if we just roll off. Okay, so we fade out, and we've got this little smooth fading in and out when the player falls off edges now. Okay, so that wraps up this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to be switching back to developing our collectible crystals. So when you're ready, I'll see you there.